Kenya is no different from what's happening in Nigeria, from what's happening in Zimbabwe, from what's happening in Sudan, from what's happening in Rwanda. In fact, you can pick any African country, and you see the same things happening. You see a greedy ruling class that is not prepared, to vacate power, no matter how strong the opposition is. You see economic crisis, you see violence, and you see ethnic conflict. The way this is reported in the West, because if any of you have been following the situation in Kenya, it's reported to people in a certain way, like as if Africans we suffer from a certain variant of barbarism, whereby we are prone to violence, we are unthinking, we are atavistic, we have no political agenda at all we're interested in doing is murdering, each other for the fun of it. You see this Miliband talking about spreading democracy, all over the world. And I thought to myself, what a cheek. Here we have the anniversary of the 15th of February, when about between 1.5 million and 2 million people, marched on the street, pressurizing the government not to invade Iraq. And this was a government that didn't take any notice of what we said and went ahead. I mean, how dare they lecture us about democracy? What they don't talk about, is the complicity of Western governments in the African crisis. Because I was talking about this thing in The Guardian where, following the report, The Guardian in the middle page normally has this nice, open-out, colourful spread. And there you had, people in this ramshackle factory, packing together roses, for, Valentine's Day. But what is the nature, of the crisis in Africa? You can't understand what's happening in Kenya unless you understand the political and economic crisis that Africa is facing today. And it's not just something that started yesterday. It didn't start last week. It didn't start last month. It didn't start last year. I mean, this is a continent, that was forcibly integrated, into the global system of capitalism. I mean, we had no choice. It wasn't as if they came to us and said, by the way, we've got this new economic system we're developing. We call it capitalism. Do you want to join? Yes or no? Unfortunately, it didn't work that way. They forced us, in, to this new global system, and they forced us in such a way, that we were the junior partners, of this global system. Because last year, I believe it was the anniversary of the end of the slave trade, not slavery. People tend to get these things mixed up. Some people were saying, oh, slavery ended in 1807. Oh, no, it didn't. It was the slave trade that ended. And you had a situation where the healthiest, of Africans, were actually taken away to provide cheap labor, in the West. Then you can imagine, the far-reaching economic effects it would have on a society. If you remove all the young people are movers and shakers, of society. They're the people that introduce, innovation. They're the people that move society forward. So if you remove a whole generation of young people, and implant them, in another continent where they're laboring for nothing, then what you're doing is you're adding to the underdevelopment, of that society that they have been taken from. Empire, and colonialism, was not to the benefit, of the African people. In fact, what actually happened was that they interrupted the autonomous development, of Africa, and made Africa, created an Africa whereby, African people, and African products, were being used to finance, global capitalism. Even after independence, I mean, despite the fact that the introduction of colonialism created a new class of Africans, a working class, that fought back, and was able, to win a certain amount, of flag independence. I mean, the situation in which they left our countries, I mean, most of these countries were one or two product, economies, and they gave these countries various tasks, like, I mean, your task is to grow groundnuts, your task is to produce gold, your task is to produce petroleum, your task is to produce cotton, and also the kind of people, that they handed over power to. I mean, if you've got internet access, there's a very good website called Veritas, which is run by a retired colonial, official called Harold Smith. And he served in Nigeria, and his thesis, is that it was a deliberate plan by the British government, to hand over power to the most retrograde elements, of the burgeoning Nigerian ruling class. In fact, the more radical elements who were calling for a certain, kind of socialism, who were calling for national self-determination and so on and so forth, they were crushed and they were locked in prison. The people that they handed over power to, they knew that these people were corrupt. They knew that these people, would loot, the treasury. And why shouldn't they? Because after colonialism, during colonialism, these were people, that were not allowed to participate, in, the economic life of the country. A very good example is from my colleague's country, where, in Kenya, there were some certain crops that black people could not grow. Especially roses. You couldn't grow roses. You couldn't grow certain crops. These crops were, and the growing of these crops were limited, to European peoples. So you have a situation where after independence, for instance, you had a greedy ruling class that took power, that had no interest in developing the country, that was quite happy, to be a junior partner in the global, scheme of things. I think there are recent figures that actually show, that since independence, about $400 billion, has been looted from the Nigerian economy. And that's just by our ruling class. This is not adding what has been looted, from the country by banks, by multinational corporations, by oil multinationals, so on and so forth. So it's in that global context, that you have to understand the crisis that is facing Africa. In Africa, for you to make money, the easiest way for you to make money is access to the state apparatus. This is why in Africa you find out that elections are like do or die. That the ruling class is prepared to manipulate religion, is prepared to manipulate ethnic loyalties, is prepared to use all sorts of things to ensure that it stays in power and to ensure that it excludes everyone else, from power. So in Africa, if you're a member of the ruling class, if you're in power, life is very good for you. Take it from me, I know. Because I remember there was a time when one of my uncles, for instance, he was the legal advisor of Mobile Nigeria Limited. And for a very long time, what this chap was involved in, was bunkering Nigeria's oil and selling it on the international market and putting the money in his pocket. And, this chap he's got a nice place at St. John's Wood. He won't have anything to do with me. Because unfortunately, let's say that I'm beyond the pale, so to speak. So you won't have anything to do with me, But these are people that the British government, has invited, these people come and go, Because if you're some poor sap, fleeing war or poverty, the British government doesn't want to know, But if you're some upper class African who should I say, unfortunately for my class, but unfortunately for his class, has been able to help himself to a couple of $1 million from the treasury. The British government wants these people, to come in, irrespective, of where their wealth has come from. And you might as well buy a football team while you're, while you're at it. So this is, in a nutshell, the global crisis that is facing Africa. So you can't understand what is happening in Kenya unless you understand the history of Africa, the way Africa has been systematically underdeveloped, and the way Africa is still being systematically underdeveloped. Because George Bush isn't there, because he wants an extended, holiday. There is another scramble, for Africa, whereby the Western powers are frightened of the fact, and China is no better. I mean, let's not fool ourselves. China is only in Africa because of the resources, that it can lay its hands on. And the Western powers are really, really frightened about this, because all these countries were guaranteed markets for the West. Now you've got China, coming in, throwing money about left, right, and centre, and considering the fact that, even on the level of bourgeois democracy, China is not a democracy, so you don't have hordes and hordes of people, asking the Chinese government questions about the exploitation, of Africa. So that is one of the reasons why George Bush is there, to stake his own claim, to the resources, of Africa. Because they say in West Africa, for argument's sake, by the year 2017, about 17% of the, I think, West African oil will provide 17% of US consumption. So that speaks volumes. So you can't understand what's happening in Africa, you can't understand what's happening in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, in Nigeria, in Sudan, without understanding the way in which Africa has been forcibly, co-opted into the global capitalist system and is being systematically underdeveloped.
I'll just take you back before the controversial post-election violence. Kenya is a country in East Africa, once upon a time a British colony, but since independence in 1963, Kenya has been a peaceful country in a war-torn region. And I'm talking about a war-torn region. When you go to East Africa, then you have the extension of what now they call Great Lake region. Kenya is just somewhere in between there, but the whole of East Africa, Great Lake region has been in conflict. I mean, when I came in the UK first time, I used to wonder, because when I was growing up in Kenya, I knew Sudan was in crisis, which is next door neighbor. Uganda was in crisis, which was again next door neighbor. Ethiopia up north was in crisis again. Somalia east was still in crisis. Therefore, when we talk about the inflow of refugees from all these four countries, in a day's time you may be talking about 2 million already in Kenya, because it was a safe haven. That is the context of the country we are talking about now. So since time immemorial, with its meager resources, has been managing the whole region, until also to making efforts to broker peace deals in different countries, so that, because the peace in the neighboring countries mean a lot to Kenya as a country. Today we know US is all over the place. America is a power. Once upon a time it was a British colony. So we cannot sit down and lament for colonialism forever and ever. We have to take responsibility. Now, with that context in mind, we go to Kenya after independence. Kenya after independence has been, at the moment as we speak, it's just 3 presidents who have been in power. What have they done in that time? I think one of the problems we have in Kenya at the moment is nothing more than constitutional crisis. Because the constitution which we inherited, most of it, not all of it, but some of the acts were drafted within the colonial setup, didn't prepare the country for future elections. And like, if we go back now, we never saw a situation whereby elections will be disputed and the people who are disputing them chooses not to go to get remedy from courts, not willing to go to even to the courts and also to the constitutional framework to get things done. Now that was not, overseen beforehand. And that is one of the problems we have at the moment. Kenya, before the election last year, we had appointments of electoral commissioners. In Kenya, that's a very important thing. When you elect the electoral commissioners, they are going to be the referees. They will oversee the elections. And if there are problems to arise, they are the people you can go back to. If you feel like you've been shortchanged during elections, you are going to go back there and, you know, present your petition. Electoral commission is a key thing. The appointments of who happens to be the electoral commissioner is a key thing. Now that is one element of the election. And then the other one is a presidential power, whereby the president at the moment appoints all the judges in court. So judiciary is in the hand of the president. Electoral commission is also in the hands of the president, because constitutionally it is the president who appoints all the electoral commissioners as well. So that being the picture we have, we went for election under such setting. And before even we went to the election, the opposition made up their mind and decided, with all the state apparatus, the incumbent president has got a chance to rig the elections, because he appointed the judges, he appoints the judges who are in court, he appointed the electoral commissioners as well, and therefore, if you are in the opposition, you thought, I cannot manage to, you know, to get remedy. Now elections are over. The opposition is not willing to go to the courts. They are not willing to go to the Electoral Commission of Kenya. Why? Because the appointments of the incumbent president, they don't see justice to be done there. Now what happened after election? They went to the street, unfortunately. And when you go to the street and you are preaching mass action, you are pressing the government to change things from the street, then the government doesn't know your agenda. The government now releases all the power to stop you from holding any meetings, and therefore confrontation takes place. But why one would wonder, yes, it was political problem. Why is it translating to people who have lived together killing each other? When the crisis began, I saw the media desperately trying to give us the angle of Rwanda, as in Hutus and Tutsis. But Kenya is not a country of two tribes. It's not a country of the Luos and Kikuyus we see on the news. Kenya has got 42 tribes. And to be fair, some of the tribes is about 3 million people. Major tribes, the 5 of them, each tribe has got about 5 million people, 4 million people. So even though we know Kikuyus as the largest tribe, they say it's 20%. That's a lie. Because in Kenya there are tribes which can equate the same number of people. Now, how do you stand in the Western capital and the only medium of information on what you watch is a framing, desperate framing of a crisis to pit 2 tribes between each other? What happens to the 40 tribes? What the media tells us is a war between the Luos and Kikuyus. Between the Luos and Kikuyus, there is the Great Rift Valley. And in the Great Rift Valley, there is about 3 different tribes who are there. The Kalenjin, the Maasais, and the Pokots. So therefore, if you were to say it's war between tribes, there has to be a reason why they have to fight. They have to be close to each other. They have to be fighting over resources. That has never happened before. In Kenya, we have Luos who marry Kikuyus. Intermarriage has taken place. I can take you everywhere in Kenya. Even in London, I show you Luos married to Kikuyu people. They are so cohesively. They live together. There's social cohesion. There's integration as well of tribes. And that's the Kenya we are talking about. Now, why are they to fight? I'll tell you one thing. My brother talked about all the crises, and he gave us the international dimension, the setting of Africa the way it is. For time immemorial, one thing that has created a gap between the haves and have-nots has been corruption. And this corruption, we are not going to exonerate the West from the blame. Because you see, when we overblow the whole issue, we talk about Anglo-leasing scandal. We can't talk about Anglo-leasing scandal, which costed the country millions of pounds, without looking to this contract which was given by the Kenya government, was given to a Western country to deliver. So there's that interconnectedness between corruption in Kenya and the West. So that corruption has created a society whereby the haves really have. But the have-nots, they are living, down the drain. And therefore, if you go to Nairobi, some places you go to, you think, why am I in London? It's a paradise. Big houses, mansions, bungalows. They have swimming pools, name everything modern. Sky TV with many free channels to watch. They don't have to subscribe. But in Nairobi as well, next to those big houses, wonderful houses, where the politicians live and the haves live, you have a ramshackle, a slum, whereby those who live there, they live down the drain. They have no hope for tomorrow. And therefore, if you go to the slums, you get supporters, people who have the time because they don't have a job to do. You get lots of people who have no hope. And therefore, if you tell them lies, tell them if I get into power, I'm going to change your life. If you vote for me, I'm going to change your life. What happens if you don't get elected? What happens if you're not going to be the president? How are they going to react? Both parties, whether it's the president or the leader of the ODM, they squarely get blamed. In a moment of political crisis, Kenyans looked up to them to get a political settlement for the crisis. People didn't have to go to the streets. It was a political difference, political issue. It was not a tribal thing. Because before elections, Kenyans were happy with each other, living together happily, getting married to each other. Just like any other day, there was peace. So it was a political problem. Leadership is what we lacked. In terms of America, approaching issues like they can always have the answer. I don't think they can. There's a lot of unanswered problems within America itself, and in Britain too, we have a lot on the plate. So I think the only solution to Kenya, if the international community has to play a bigger role, the starting point has to be recognize the sovereignty of the country. If you attack any sovereignty of the country, nothing else is left. It means any country can intervene. But what does intervention mean? Is it going to be positive or is it going to be negative? It's always left to question. If you talk about truth and you talk about justice and you talk about fairness, I think the prerequisite has to be peace. Because without peace, negotiations won't happen. Without peace, talks to create framework which can regulate the society as a whole properly is not going to take place. Without peace, no mediation can take place. We may clamor for democracy, we may clamor for freedom, we may clamor for justice, but on the very, the key issue is peace. Because with peace, then a solution will be found. Justice and all other things and democracy is much more secondary.
The whole question of Kenya being a peaceful country, the whole question of peace is relative. And I actually know that in Kenya during the period of Jomo Kenyatta, political assassination was used as a form of politics. Because the number of people, I think there was a Labour leader who, Kenyatta was a very strange kind of a person. This was a man that had nothing to do with the Land and Freedom Army. In fact, sometimes there's a way in which myths are built around, certain people. Kenyatta was never a radical. That is one thing. One. Two, Kenyatta never had anything to do with the Land and Freedom Army, what people here call Mau Mau. Dedan Kimathi never described the Land and Freedom Army as Mau Mau. It was the colonialists, that described them as Mau Mau. In fact, in Kenya today, land, is still a burning issue. Because during the last World Social Forum that was held in Kenya, in fact, some of the ex-Mau Mau, some of the ex-Land and Freedom generals, actually protested you know, on the question of land, you know, and we have a film showing a female Land and Freedom Army general, somebody called General Muthoni, you know, actually talking about their struggle, you know, in the forests, you know, and the fact, you know, that independence in Kenya was seen as a betrayal, you know, because the people that they actually handed power to, you know, were people who, during the struggle for land, were on the side of the British. I mean, one of the biggest problems in Kenya today is during the period of Arap Moi, you know, when corruption and looting and social injustice was at an all-time high, you know, people felt that Mwai Kibaki would bring about at least some sort of change. But, you know, Kibaki was a man that was more interested, you know, in furthering his golf handicap, you know, than he was running the country. Because this man is a very, I think in terms of golf handicap, I think he does better than Gary Player, you know, or even Tiger Woods, because he was more interested in his golf handicap than he was, you know, the country. You know, so the thing about it is that with the present situation, you know, in Kenya, where for the mass of the people, you know, life has become such a terrible struggle. I mean, the same thing in Nigeria. For the mass of the people, life has become such a terrible struggle. So people were looking to the elections for some sort of change, you know, in their lives. That was what they were looking for. And you have a situation where during the elections, all Mwai Kibaki's, you know, ministers, they were all voted out of power. And to me, it defies logic, you know, how, you know, all MPs in the cabinet, who were cabinet ministers, can all be voted out of power, but yet the president wins the election. One of the biggest problems in Africa is the dearth, you know, of progressive ideas. And, you know, this is one of our biggest problems. And the reason why we have that problem is because many of us learned our politics from the old Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, you know, what that meant was that there was a vacuum of political, you know, ideas. I think the fact that the crisis has degenerated in Kenya to the level it has shows the bankruptcy of the opposition. It simply shows the bankruptcy of the opposition, because the opposition has nothing to offer the people. You know, because people believe, just like they believe in Nigeria, and this is where ethnicity comes in, because where I come from, you know, people believe that in the north, everybody must be enjoying, you know, that there's good life for everyone in the north, and it's those of us in the south, you know, that are suffering. You know, and any progressive political movement has to emphasize the question of rich and poor, the question of class. Because all over Africa, you know, the way politicians stay in power is that they mask their intentions, you know, with ideology. You know, and in Africa, this ideology is not, it can be religion, you know, and it can also be ethnicity. You know, vote for me because I am the son, you know, of the soil. You know, and I remember when I was coming into politics, you know, we had to fight, you know, we had to wage battles, you know, against this kind of thinking, you know, to get people to detach themselves, you know, from the ruling class of their own ethnic, you know, groups. Because if you look at it, at the end of the day, you know, Raila Odinga is not beating, you know, Mwai Kibaki. In fact, he's quite happy to sit down, you know, and talk with him. You know, while people are breaking their heads, you know, in, you know, the streets. And that should tell you something. I mean, it's the same thing in Nigeria, where come election time, there's ethnic conflict, you know, people are, you know, ordinary people, you know, are killing themselves in the streets. But yet you see the ruling classes, you know, from different ethnic groups, all sitting together, you know, they have no problem. You know, their problem is that they use us as the cannon fodder, you know, to get into power. You know, any progressive politics, you know, will have to emphasize the question of class. You know, that we have nothing in common, with these people. As far as I'm concerned, any African person who's a ruling class, I have nothing in common, with these people. In fact, these people are our bitterest, enemies, and there will be no, all this talk about peace, there can be no peace without social justice, as far as I'm concerned. So what we should be putting on the table, is the question of social justice. The masses are not ignorant. In fact, they're more intelligent than you, they're more intelligent than I am. Because the masses don't have to read big books to understand, the politics or how they are being exploited. It's their life. Your life is exploitation. They don't have to read Marx's Capital to understand that they're being exploited. The fact that their daily life is one of toil, is one of exploitation, and it's a global village. So they can actually compare what is happening to them, with what is happening in other parts, of the world. What the politicians in Africa do is that they speak in the colonial languages. Kenya is not an English-speaking country. Neither is Nigeria. Nigeria is not an English-speaking country. So the politicians, what they do is to exclude people from the national debate. They speak in English, or they speak in French, or they speak in Portuguese. When Ngugi wrote Petals of Blood, and why Kibaki helped him launch it, when Ngugi decided that he was going to write in Gikuyu, he found himself in prison. Because these people are not stupid. They know that if you're writing in local languages, people will understand what you're talking about. As long as you're writing in English, only a small number of people, will understand what you're all about. I'm totally against any intervention by the Western powers. There was intervention in Sierra Leone. There was intervention in Sudan. There's been intervention in a whole load of other places. And you see, people have this mistaken belief that the West is a neutral player, when they intervene, in these societies. And, as far as I'm concerned, they are not, because they have their own agenda. On the question of social justice, I think the task before us, is how we build mass movements, of our people, that, can seize the resources, that are needed, for, their development. It's a task, because at the end of the day, it's generating new ideas, because the old certainties, are gone. When I was growing up, and when I first came into politics, our model was the Soviet Union, it was Cuba, it was Vietnam, it was North, Korea. These were the societies that we used to look up to. Now, we know that these societies had nothing to do with socialism, and they're monstrous totalitarian societies. So what we really need to do is to go back to basics, and basically, if we want democracy, if we want peace, if we want social justice, then ordinary people need to do it for themselves. They need to do it for themselves. The institutions that hold people down here also hold people down in Africa. In Nigeria, the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, his favorite capitalist, was Richard Branson. Richard Branson, Virgin Atlantic is basically the Nigerian carrier. Look at Shell BP. Shell BP actually arms Nigerian soldiers to massacre people, in the Niger Delta. We have actually seen some victories, where people are prepared to fight back. In Nigeria, trade union leaders are fighting back every day. In Guinea, a struggle that was underreported in this country. And the reason why it was underreported in this country is because every time ordinary people struggle, it throws out of the window all the racist lies that they tell about us. In Guinea, what they did was they forced a head of state, to actually appoint a prime minister of their own choice. But they won't tell you that, because as far as the Western press are concerned, Africa is good for the, what are the biological terms, for the flora and fauna. The people, unfortunately, are just an inconvenience.
I just came back on Sunday and I've been to the camps for the internally displaced persons. They are there in their thousands of them. While we know the fighting, the violence erupted possibly because of the, after the announcement of the disputed elections, I mean the results of the elections. It is also important to reckon that the violence was incited politically. There has never been real tribal animosity in Kenya. It has happened sometimes. Small tribes, that like the nomadic communities, they get on the throats of each other, but not over the reason that they are of another community, no. It's over land, over grazing land. The moment it rains, it's over, and people continue coexisting together. What am I driving at? From the camps, particularly Nakuru is the headquarters of the Rift Valley province, and there were two huge camps. One is hosting the people from the Kikuyu community, the larger tribe. Those were evicted from parts of the Rift Valley, like Kericho, Eldoret, you know about the story where the church was burnt with 40 people alive. And then another camp, that's a huge stadium, Afraha Stadium, is hosting members of Luo community and Luo community. Sorry, I'm getting into those nitty-gritty details, or you may not understand. But in both camps, okay, it is perceived that they were politically they were supporting two different sides. That's true. Kikuyus are pro-Kibaki, and the other communities are pro-Raila Odinga. But right now, because of the suffering they are undergoing through in those camps, having lost their homes, none of them is talking to you about either Kibaki or Raila. It's about their lives. They want to get back to their normal lives. They are not happy with Kibaki. They are not happy with Raila either. They are not looking forward to any political solution. They are looking forward to normal life. And that way, I mean, it gives you a sense that what they want, at some point, they are going to get it. They are not going to be swayed or driven by what the politicians say. And they know that, at least those in the Rift Valley know that they were told during the campaign periods by some of the politicians, you know, when you elect me, I'm going to weed out these people. You know, referring to some people as weeds in a farm, trying to convince the locals, natives, that your problems are because of this other tribe that has come to stay among us. You know, that kind of a thing. So it's very, very important to take note that while we've got so many tribes who have been coexisting together peacefully, there was incitement, political incitement to this violence, and there is hope. I am optimistic, having been there.
Out of this has given Kenya the chance to solve all the legislative problems that has put the country back. Kenya needs a new constitution. It is from the constitution which will guarantee the interest of all people, through which justice will be guaranteed. And we are talking of social justice, we are talking of distributive justice, in which case there will be equitable distribution of all the national resources. Ordinary people are crying for normality to come back. Why? Because they just want to do their job the way they were doing, to carry on with their lives. African politics, whichever country you go, have been revolving around the big man. If you're the president, you have immediate circle. And you appoint them, they will be your circle. And it's that particular circle where the so mythical national cake stays. That's all what I can say. It is that national cake which will have to be taken out of the hands of the political few and be equally distributed to all the countrymen, wherever you go in Africa. If I'm wrong, correct me, but I think I rest my case.